Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. Just before I get going, I've had a few people point out that in the old Latin, which Tacitus would have used in the old Latin thousands of years ago, the C was pronounced as a hard C or a K, if you like, so it would have been pronounced Tacitus. I use the modern pronunciation Tacitus, or some in the Italian, their pronunciation of the C is a ch, so Tacitus, but I use Tacitus, but I'm aware of the other pronunciations. Now, I came across a recruitment manual or recruiter's manual. This was an internal guide in a manufacturing, quite a large manufacturing company in Britain, and it was a guide to their a policy guide, if you will, or an instruction guide for their hiring managers or personnel managers, as they later became known. So this was how do you go about selecting applicants to fill a position. Now you've got a range of positions here. There's blue collar workers on the factory floor. Then there's the supervisory level of the blue collar workers. Then the white collar workers. Again, more junior white collar workers, the more senior ones. Then you've got the managerial or executive level. So they've got quite a spread of people. Given the labour intensive nature or relatively labour intensive nature of work at the time, they've got a lot of blue collar workers. Now, Britain was still quite a class conscious country in 1911, which is when this was set. So that does come across to some extent in the way the instructions are put together. But nonetheless, what struck me as interesting was how grounded in hard reality it was. There was no mention of race or gender or anything like that at all. It was all, can the person do the job? Now there was a couple of imperatives, I guess, that we have to get someone to fill that role. Now, if we can't get someone who's suitably credentialed, they've done it before or they're qualified in that area, or something. If we can't get that, then we'll just have to get the best we can get to fill that role. It may not be exactly what we want in a perfect world, but we need the role filled. So let's get the best. So the best possible of those who've applied. This idea of running adverts for months or years or anything like that to somehow hold out for the magic candidate, that's just nowhere to be seen. That sort of sentiment. So now the key thing, excuse me, the key thing that came across to me at least was the constant reminder to the hiring manager that you have to have someone who's got a mental ability equal to their surroundings. So they have to be able to deal with their circumstances, situation, and they need a certain degree of mental sophistication and capacity to do that. And if you can achieve that, then you've got a much better chance of getting a successful outcome. So I thought that was interesting. Now I don't know how that assessment would have worked necessarily. I assume they're going to use things like level of education and so on. But given how practical the whole thing was, I don't think they'd have been impressed by a degree in lesbian dance theory or something like that. Ideology clearly wasn't a relevant issue. Now, even at a time when are you a Catholic or are you a Protestant, and when these things were still a hangover from the religious wars of Europe, that went on for quite a while. There was still that hangover that was there. That powerful Catholic countries are wanting to invade England, which is true, and so there's still that was there. But the grounding and practical reality is quite obvious. So the effort was made to determine capability to do the job, and that it didn't deviate from that, and that was the instruction, the constant instruction throughout this. Now, again, in spite of that, though, or as part of that, there was a general acceptance that sometimes you just can't get the skills that you want or capabilities you want, because as the manual points out, there's a lot of new equipment and new technologies that are entering the production or the manufacturing space in this instance. And it doesn't mean that we're always going to be able to get someone that we want. There were certain references to we're only prepared to pay a certain wage, so we have to get the best we can for that wage. That was sort of in there. But reading it was just really a very practical, very sensible, very reasonable approach to hiring, and none of that seems to apply today. The race gender quotas and we don't hire Nazis around here, that sort of thing. And if we can prevent a straight white male from getting a job, then we've achieved something glorious and wonderful. Those sorts of attitudes. Now, another interesting thing was there are photographs of this company at the time, and areas or sections of their workforce, and of the overall workforce, probably 20% were women. Now, there's an idea that women couldn't work, didn't work, weren't allowed to work, and especially in the gender studies type courses, they say women were prevented from working and weren't allowed to by the evil patriarchy. That's clearly nonsense. I just checked on that and looked at some other photographs, say from the United States around that time and through into the 1920s and or even into the 1930s, at a time when allegedly women weren't allowed to work, and as many as 30% or a third, if you like, of the workforce, certainly in the photographs, were women. Nor were they all sort of teenagers, fresh out of junior high school, cheap labour, the year before, just shortly before they got married. It wasn't like that either. There were women there clearly who were in their 40s and 50s. So again, that really lays to rest this farcical claim that the radical lesbian feminists used, that women weren't allowed to work and they only got their freedom sort of in 1970s. That's absolute crap. And I was surprised at how many women were working. I knew there'd be some, but I didn't think there'd be that many there. So the closeness to practical reality was the bit or the thing that came out of this, that there was no attempt to be ideological. There was no attempt to be to socially engineer or anything like that. It was, the document was, how do we get the people that we need to do the job that we need to be done? That was it, and the focus was on that. So now the vestiges of that still remained. When I first entered the workforce, so you still see that there. It wasn't as pronounced as this thing in 1911 was, but it was. It certainly was part of the deal. There were this idea of race and gender quotas was starting to appear, particularly gender quotas initially was starting to appear, and I recall one of the stints I had in or personnel, I called it at the time, one of the stints that I had in there, just relieving for someone who's on holiday. When you were sort of, as they called it at the time, a trainee, they like to move you around into different departments and areas of the business, so you've got a broad experience of the company's operations, which I think is a good idea, by the way. I thought it worked, certainly opened my eyes to how things operated in other areas of the company rather than just in one aspect or just in another. I got to see many parts of the operation, and I thought that stood me in good stead in the future. But I remember the company suddenly got a thing about hiring women into what they called cadet trainees, and I happened to arrive in personnel at the time when they were doing their, I think it was like a half-yearly exam. They had a practical exam, and you had to do like a written paper as well. And I was told by whoever the boss was, I don't think it was the CEO, but somebody came around and said, "Look, we want you to pass all the female cadets. Every one of them has to be passed." And it doesn't matter whether they failed or failed horribly, or even if they've failed to even hand in their paper or do the test, you'll pass them irrespective. And I remember sitting there, sort of looking at, thought maybe the guy's having a joke. He's lost his mind, or he's been snorting too much coke out the back or something like. I looked at him in absolute disbelief. Do you realise what you just said? And to me, at the time, and I think to most people, exams were impartial, independent. They were the measurement. Did you or did you not do your work? Did you or did you not satisfy the requirements? So that was very much a thing that you didn't fiddle with it. You didn't play around with it. You didn't twist it for some sort of ideological purpose. And that was my first real, in the workforce, my first real exposure to that. And so I queried it. So, can you say that again? Did I hear that correctly? And the guy perceived that I may have been, it was an act of defiance rather than, a question as a result from shock on my part. And further said, look, if you don't do it, we'll get rid of you and find someone who will. You've got a promising career here. Everyone's saying good things about you, but you'll be out on the street if you don't do what you're told. Oh, holy shit. So that was how important the ideology was to them. You'll just arbitrarily take people out the back and shoot them if they don't go along with it, which is very much how ideology works, by the way, because it has no actual justification. The only justification is if you back it up with deadly force, which is what was the case here. So, I did what I was told, and got a hard time from the male cadet trainees, because they knew that the girls hadn't done the work and some of them hadn't even handed in a paper at all. And to try and make it look good, I sort of, or appear at least that it was balanced. When the girls hadn't handed their paper in on Friday, I gave them the weekend to do it so they could hand it in on Monday. So at least it wasn't so brazen that they were being passed without having done any of the work. And even then, they didn't do it. And so the guys gave me a hard time, and I had to say, look, this is straight from the top. I've been told to do it. I felt rather weak afterwards, thinking I should have stood up to them, but they'd have only got rid of me. I was just a kid, really, and they could have easily and effortlessly thrown me out the top floor. So, but coming back to this 1911 thing, we perceive the past as being sort of Neanderthal and having the most outrageous practices and the most outrageous prejudices and oppressions, and it was all evil. And in the past, it was Nazis everywhere. That's not so. That 1911 manual, which I assume is representative of what was going on, and even in a class society, it's still focused on that. You'd have had to test it. Say somebody from the lower working class would have aspired to being a white collar executive in the executive suite, and had they been qualified, would the hiring manager have given them the job? Probably not. If you tested the various pressure points sort of around the whole system, you probably would have found there were points where there wasn't any crossover, or there wouldn't have been a crossover. That those sort of people, you just don't have them in the executive suite, and that's the end of it. So those perceptions, I think, would have been there. I don't know. I'm surmising, but I imagine they would be. But that aside, it was practicality, and the manual suggests you overlook things, intelligence adequate to someone surrounded. Let's suppose someone is technically competent of doing a certain job, but they've got their upbringing is such where they have the most vulgar manners and boorish behaviour and so on. Would you deem those people as inappropriate to be in a certain setting or circumstances where that behaviour would create sort of tensions or difficulty? Would you have that? And then could you transpose that to say, well, we've got workplaces free of Nazis now, so we don't hire straight white males because they're Nazis, and because so the issue was if your behaviour was substantially different, not what you may have thought or you may have believed that they suspect you may believe, and these sorts of things. So there wasn't any ideology in it, and in the 1911 instruction booklet. So So I would say that that is a far superior document as instructing people on how to hire than anything that's going around today. It's not those little 2D bimbos in, lefty lesbian bimbos in HR today, human resources today. Do they have a superior methodology to them? No, I would say not. I would say the 1911 booklet was a far more practical, sensible, reasonable, by far, a document than what we see today. And the new wealth generation that occurred during those times is a testament to, in a competitive market, is a testament to how those businesses needed to do that to compete successfully in the marketplace, selling their goods and services. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.